Original signatories to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850, and we recognize the significant contributions of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples to our heritage, social, cultural, spiritual, and economic wealth. The Chamber is committed to a relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people that is grounded on the principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in a spirit of reconciliation. Our thanks to our Leaders Luncheon series sponsor, Inner City Industrial Supply. I know Tony is here somewhere. Thank you, Tony. Give him a round of applause. They've been more years than I can count at this point, so it's always great to have their support. And to our event sponsor today, T-Baytel. So thanks to Dan and the team at T-Baytel for your support today. Really appreciate that. We do have a few special guests in attendance today. We have two city councillors here. I'd like to welcome Councillor Kristen Oliver. Give a wave, Kristen. And Councillor Dominic Pasqualino. Thanks so much for being here. And of course our guest speaker Norm that I'll introduce in a moment or two. I'd also like to recognize a couple of our board directors, Anne Antonucci from the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Foundation. Thank you, Anne. And Riley Burton Confederation College. Thank you, Riley. So let's get this party started. Our guest speaker today is Norm Gale. Norm has been the city manager since the fall of 2015, and prior to that was the chief of the Superior North Emergency Medical Services with the city and the District of Thunder Bay since 2007. And he was also a frontline paramedic for more than a decade. This followed a career in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserve, where Norm served as Army communicator. And he retired from the Army Reserve after 23 years of service. He clearly started at 10 in the Army, one of the earliest, youngest recruits. Mr. Gale is a graduate of Confederation College paramedic program, fellow alumni, and has an honorary degree in history and political science and a master's degree in business administration from Lakehead University. He's previously served as the chair of the Thunder Bay District Board of Health, vice president of the United Way of Thunder Bay, and president of the Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs. And I didn't know this until I read your bio. He's been appointed to the Order of St. John and awarded the Canada Decoration. So that's really great. Congratulations on that. In addition to providing strategic leadership and overall administration to the city manager develops corporate policy and provides advice to council about city organization and operating procedure. He also heads one of 5 city departments, the city manager's office, which includes strategic initiatives and engagement, legal services, human resources and corporate safety, and the office of the city clerk. So put your hands together and welcome City Manager Norm Gale.
Is it all right if I just stand here and speak like this?
Yeah.
Come on. He said it was okay.
You can move that around on the stage if you want.
Okay, I'll do it Charla's way. I joined the Army when I was 16 years old, lied about my age, got away with it for about 3 years until they busted me, and somebody said, you know, Gale's lied about his age for some reason. Got busted, and it's actually an offense under the National Defense Act. And for a day or two, I was worried they were going to charge me and march me out the door, but they didn't. They just gave me a lot of hell and said, "You're okay. You stay around here." And the benefit that I got was an extra year of Army, but for 1 year, I had ID that said I was 19, and that was pretty cool at the time. Never had to worry about anything. I've been coming to these chamber dinners or learning luncheons for years. Always enjoying them, always enjoying the speakers and the presentations. So I am really delighted to be here. In fact, I'm privileged. So I appreciate you all coming out to listen to a few words that I speak, and we'll see what questions Charla has for me afterwards and what questions you have. And we'll see where it goes. So I'm honored and privileged to be here to share some information about what's going on in the corporation of the City of Thunder Bay that I think is timely and topical. Some of the things that I'll speak to are the city's strategic plan, the process that we're going through now, and the role, hopefully, that you will play in the continuing development of that strategic plan. The city's budget, where we have been directed to bring back a proposed budget of 5.5% with no significant changes to service levels. That's how it stands today, at least. We'll speak to asset management and the infrastructure gap that the city faces and how that ties into the city's budget. And finally, a few comments on strong mayors and what that means, largely potentially for the corporation and for the people who live and work in Thunder Bay. Before that though, I would like to introduce members of the city's executive management team who are here because they know that they might need to help me when I get challenged with some tough questions, which I'm sure are coming. They're also going to fact check me because we'll see where that goes. We have Kelly Robertson here, who's the General Manager of Community Services, Karen Lewis, General Manager of Corporate Services, Carrie Ortgees, Director of HR, Cynthia Olson, Acting Director of Strategies. We've got Joel DePuter, Director of Planning. We also have Stacy Lebanon here. Okay. I just got lost in thought for just for a second with corporate communications. Let's talk about the strategic plan. So the strategic plan is in process. It's happening right now where it's continuing to be developed. In July, we presented a draft strategic plan to council. That was but one step. It was not the final strategic plan. It was the draft. And once that's approved, what needs to happen is the action plan, the deliverables, what's being implemented, the measurables need to be developed. And that's the process that's happening now. Cynthia Olson is leading that work on our behalf. And the most important thing in my mind to consider when we're talking about strategy for the corporation of the City of Thunder Bay is that strategy belongs to council. The elected officials are elected to make decisions and to determine and drive the future of our city. And the strategic plan is the tool, the venue in which they express that vision and how that vision gets driven. In July, they approved a strategic plan that focuses on community well-being and growth. These are high value topics and top of mind for the elected officials, City Council. And we are now working on the plan to develop those deliverables, measurables, and how that's going to be implemented downstream. There are sessions being done where stakeholders, internal and external, provide input to us. We put that plan together, and then we'll bring it to council before the end of this year, where council will provide their input, give their direction, and make a final determination of how the strategic plan is being implemented and it's being measured. The strategic plan really matters. In my mind, it's one of the two most important documents that City Council will consider and decide. The other is actually 4 documents, and it's the 4 annual budgets. The strategic plan provides the vision and the direction that administration considers whenever we bring a report or a recommendation to City Council. Indeed, we provide a link in each report to the strategic plan to show how our recommendation connects and is informed by the strategic plan. So it's consequential. It's consequential to administration, and it's also, I argue, consequential to the public, to the people in their community, so that they have an idea of what City Council's vision is and what is important to them. I mentioned the other document, and that's the budget times 4. So we're working on a budget right now, subsequent to City Council direction that we received in July of this year, where I mentioned earlier, we're to bring a budget of 5.5% with no substantial changes to service levels. And at this time, that is what we're working on. That could change. That could change depending on how strong Mayor's powers rolls up. I'll speak to that, I'll come back to that. But until and if that happens, any implication on the budget, this is what we're doing and this is where we're at. 5.5%, no substantial changes. Improvements, implementation of changes that have already been decided, like our digitization strategy requires investment. Our human resources strategy requires investment. And continued investment on infrastructure. And I'll come back to infrastructure in a moment. We'll go next to asset management. But a few more words on the budget. 5.5%, no substantial changes. That is a significant increase. I acknowledge that. But in my view, and consistent with our recommendation to City Council a few months ago, it is in concert with what's happening in the world around us and what's happening to municipalities in Ontario, Canada, and the Western world. Our costs are outpacing our ability to draw revenue to pay for the programs and services that you both rely on and enjoy. We are on an unsustainable path. While we project at this time, the budget pressures will lessen somewhat in 24 and 25, somewhat, not significantly. That's a short-term look. A long-term look is that we simply can't keep doing what we're doing. And there's no world that exists where you have modest or zero tax increases, great public services, and reliable modern infrastructure. Something has to give somewhere. It is said often, and it sounds trite, and perhaps some will argue that it is, but tough decisions have to be made. And sometimes that tough decision is a larger than usual tax increase to maintain and protect those programs and services. Thunder Bay is not alone. Look at what's happening in Toronto. Toronto is not a comparable city to Thunder Bay. It's not the same. We all know this to be true. In fact, Toronto has its own legislation, the City of Toronto Act, so they have different rules that they follow as opposed to every other municipality in in Ontario. But Toronto for years has had relatively low tax increases, 2% plus or minus for years. They have incredible growth and increasing revenue, and arguably, based on what I read in Toronto media, and I read the newspapers a lot, crumbling infrastructure. Toronto's infrastructure gap, arguably from what I read, is worse than ours. So Toronto sought, and has been arguing for years, for a new deal with Ontario. And we heard yesterday, where Premier Ford announced that there would be a new deal for Toronto. I don't know the details, and I don't think the details have been released, and if they have, I haven't seen them. But a new deal nonetheless. Every municipality in Ontario needs a new deal. The way we draw revenue, either from property taxation or from user fees or from government grants, is not sufficient to keep doing what we're doing and to keep doing what we're told and required to do. One of the roles of Ontario, the province, with respect to the municipality, because we are creatures of the province, and that comes from the British North America Act. Ontario tells us what to do, and at what level to do it, and at what quality. Ontario tells us what not to do. And then there's this little bit in the middle that we can choose. Council chooses as to what to do. We need to align revenue with spending. How is it that property taxes are paying for health care and social services? The argument is government provides us with grants to help us out with that, and that's true. And grant funding has increased recently, so we're grateful for that. But it's not enough. It's not enough to keep doing what we're doing. A comparable city is Sudbury. Sudbury is, in fact, very similar to Thunder Bay. But Sudbury is ahead of us on growth, and the mining growth is happening in Sudbury now, and we're coming, but they're ahead of us on that. So they have growth. But Sudbury right now, the direction their council has given their city manager, in order to hit, I think it's 4.57% next year. Remember, we're at 5.5. In order for Sudbury to hit 4.57%, don't hold me on those numbers, it's something like that, they need to find more than $10 million in cuts. We're coming in at 5.5 without substantial cuts. So what's happening? Not exactly sure, but every municipality in the province and Canada has significant financial challenges. Those challenges are linked to the programs and services that we provide, but they're also linked to the infrastructure and our infrastructure gap. So we'll talk about asset management now. What is the infrastructure gap? You hear that thrown out about? And yes, it's really important. The infrastructure gap is the difference in what we're spending and what we need to spend to properly maintain existing infrastructure that we have. So, the existing infrastructure that we have, roads, bridges, water and sewer, that kind of thing, we are spending just south of $35 million less a year than we need to. And this is one of the reasons why we are required by the province to have an asset management plan. And that asset management plan, which we're working on now, lays out how we're going to address this infrastructure gap. So phase one of the asset management plan has been presented to council, and that's where we get the $35 million, south of $35 million a year for core assets. That's phase one. Phase two is everything else. So the south of $35 million does not include everything else. It includes core assets only. What's everything else? Everything else is parks, equipment. Think about things like the beds we have at Pioneer Ridge, the long-term care home. Parks, the playgrounds, the outdoor swimming pools. Add that on top of the south of $35 million in the infrastructure gap that we have. Our challenges are significant. And we're not able to keep up with the revenue that we have in delivering programs and services and maintaining infrastructure. But the city needs to grow. We need more housing. We need more and new infrastructure. City Council, with a unanimous vote, just approved the next step for a multi-use indoor turf facility. Needed infrastructure. new infrastructure, but needed. One of the challenges we will see with growth, and growth will come, and growth is a good thing. Growth is necessary, and it's positive, and it's win-win. But we'll need to keep up with growth. With new subdivisions, new streets, come new operating costs, come new demands, more services. What are we going to do with emergency services? Police, fire, and EMS. Do we need more resources to serve these new houses and these new subdivisions? What about solid waste management? What about street maintenance, plowing roads? What about new trails for active transportation and parks associated with new neighborhoods? Then there's other infrastructure that's not related to the city. Schools, for example. Growth is positive. We need growth. We need to have it, and we heard that loud and clear from council in the strategic plan, where they made growth a priority for the city. We heard that loud and clear. But we need to keep up. We need to have the back in behind to support that growth. So the challenges are significant, but they're not insurmountable. We're working on it. The City Council is providing direction to deal with asset management, to deal with the infrastructure gap and the infrastructure deficit. You might recall, you might know that we've committed to a 5% increase in infrastructure funding each year. Unfortunately, that 5% is being eaten up by inflation, and the particular inflation that's related to that infrastructure spending, which is not the same as a CPI, Consumer Price Index. So council's working on it, and we're working to support council. And this will bring my final comments to strong mayors. If you're following the news, and if you're paying attention, you'll know that Mayor Ken Boshkoff has said that he will seek strong mayor powers. I don't know whether he's done that yet or not, but it doesn't really matter. But for the purpose, it does matter. But for the purpose of this chat, Mayor Ken Boshkoff has the ability and authority to do what he chooses when it comes to strong mayor powers. But I think it's really important that stakeholders, people who do business with the city, people who live and work in the city, understand what this actually means. And the transition prospectively to a strong mayor system is the biggest change in municipal governance that I have seen in my career in the public service. In that, I include local services realignment in 1999, otherwise known as download. Euphemistic, but local services realignment. Changes potentially are significant. The mayor has choices to make. The first choice is whether he will seek them, and I think he said to the media, I don't speak for him, but I think he said he's going to seek them. But after that, the mayor has choices about which strong mayor powers to exercise. The mayor can delegate several of those strong mayor powers, or the mayor can exercise those strong mayor powers. This will affect the role of council in governance, and this will affect the role of administration in delivering programs and services and in making recommendations. It is a big change. And what we know is outweighed 100-fold by what we don't know. Ottawa and Toronto were awarded strong mayor powers last year, 10 months ago. And there's very little experience from that because Ottawa mayors, there's been two, have never accepted these powers, and Toronto, John Tory accepted them for a period of weeks. Other cities that were directed to be strong mayors, there's about 20 of them, that happened in May, effective, I think, June 30th. So there's no experience to draw from what this looks like practically. So together, administration, council, and the mayor are working to see where this goes. I cannot say, I cannot predict, I don't know where it goes. Only that it will change and it will look different. I hope you found that informative. With that, I am getting the hook. I got the eye. So, do I just sit down?
Just grab that mic and bring it with me.
Okay.
Now the drilling begins.
So this is an opportunity for our members to ask some questions of Norm Gale, and as he mentioned, he does have some senior team folks here with him to give him some insight if we stump him.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the chance to have this conversation. So let's start with, let's carry on with growth. There's been a lot of talk about things like the Housing Accelerator Fund that the city has applied for as a way to get some additional support to support that kind of growth that you're talking about, to meet our mining needs, etc. What exactly is our application? How much money would that potentially be if our application is approved from that fund?
Yeah, so everybody's looking for growth. Like I said earlier, growth is a positive thing and we want to see it. And the challenges that come with growth should not dissuade us from growth, right? We just need to recognize that every new house, every new street, every new subdivision brings along another set of demands that go in behind that. And this is why, or one of the reasons why government funding is really important to help us with growth. So we're talking about funding from both Canada and Ontario. The Canada funding, the Housing Accelerator Program, is not linked to strong mayors. The Ontario funding is linked to strong mayors. The Ontario funding we estimate to be between $550,000 and $600,000 a year for 3 years, potentially, should we meet 80% of the target in the first 3 years that was supplied to us by Queen's Park. So we'll see where that goes. This year we're close, but not, well, we're closer than we ever have been to meeting a target that would, or to meeting growth that would be part of that target. The Canada funding is a different story, and we're in the process of doing that application there. I cannot say what potentially that would mean.
Thanks. So building on that then, so we've got some funding to hopefully help us move forward. We've also heard complaints, concerns for many years from the development community about a couple of issues that they perceive to be barriers to growth. The first is sort of a long and costly building process to get a building permit. The second being tax policy, in which if a developer submits their subdivision development plan, they are immediately put fully on the tax roll. And so there's a significant cost, even if you've not built a single house in that subdivision. Are those issues that city administration is looking at as a way to potentially cut some of the red tape and remove some of the barriers to allow housing growth to move forward more quickly?
I'll answer your question directly, Charla, but just a few general comments. I recognize that developers and builders do see red tape and do see bureaucracy getting in their way. But I resist the notion that Thunder Bay, the city, the corporation, is overly obstructive when it comes to development. I've had conversations with people who want to develop over the years. Now this goes back to 2015, especially when I first became city manager, where I'd get a message, somebody wants to talk to me, there's too much red tape, I'm gonna add to the tax base, but I can't because City Hall's killing me. Words to that effect. So I make the call and I have a conversation, and what's actually happening is the builder doesn't agree with the legislation or doesn't agree with the public health standards or whatever it is, so therefore we need to change that so the builder can build. That's not red tape. There is responsible legislation and responsible standards that govern property. But it's not a mutually exclusive proposition. I recognize frustration in the development community, and I know that developers would like to build quicker. And I think if we can do that, we ought to. We ought to make it easier for developers and others to build new things. To that end, in the last term of council directed us, and you played a big hand in this, Charla, changing the official plan and the zoning bylaw. Huge changes were made, and we see positive indicators right now as a result of that. The Chamber of Commerce in Charlotte were part of that work, as was the development community. I think substantial strides have been made in a positive direction. And we've got housing numbers now that are higher than they have been in the last 5 years. Causation correlation, housing numbers now are higher than they have been in 5 years. Finally, I do recognize consternation, and I do know that there is frustration. Appreciate that. Let's work together.
Thanks for that. We'll have more conversations on our next walk, I'm sure.
Does anybody from the audience have a question? Just throw your hand up and we'll get you to Kathleen Lynch. Go ahead.
Oh, this is gonna be hard.
No, it's not, Norm. Thank you for your presentation. Great overview of complex processes at the city. Appreciate that. What are our city reserves and what are our recommended reserves, or, you know, that rainy day fund any city should have?
Yep.
And how are you planning to, you know, use those funds and keep reserves at a healthy level if we're just kind of maintaining and we have this ongoing challenge with infrastructure costs?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Kathleen. So the first comment is, don't think of the city's budget like your household budget. It's not the same. I often hear comparators, you know, I don't do this with my own personal budget. Yeah, right, I agree, neither do I. But there's a reason we do it in the city, and that's explainable for different circumstances. Reserve funds are not like your savings account. That analogy is often drawn, but it's not the same. Certainly some reserves can be viewed as a rainy day fund, and absolutely. One of those is a stabilization reserve. And this is the one that probably gets the most attention from the public and stakeholders. So we have our annual operating budget and capital budget. Put it all together, we're talking $500 million. $500 million is our combined total budgets. Revenue comes in from a bunch of different sources. We spend a bunch of money on a bunch of different ways, but $500 million. The stabilization reserve, the intent is to balance out when we run a negative variance. A negative variance is we've spent more than we've been given by council, okay? The city, the municipality is not allowed to run a deficit. Not allowed to run a deficit. So we have to use existing money to balance the budget. We can't borrow and use that for operating funds. There's exceptions, but not like the federal and provincial governments. We can't do that. So the stabilization reserve is there. In my view, it's healthy when it's about $12 million. And in my first 7 years as city manager, we were low and we built it up to $12 million, carefully and methodically over the years, to get to where we thought was a safe level. And now it's come down again. It's come down because of pressures. And that's exactly the point. We've had negative variances for the last 2 years. And the stabilization rounds that out so we don't have to go back to you and ask for more money. The same applies when we have a positive variance. Before the pandemic, actually, when I became city manager, we had 4 consecutive years of negative variances. I became city manager, positive variance, and then 7 years of positive variances consecutively. Each year we took the positive money, we were under budget, and put it into the stabilization reserve, and that's how we build up the stabilization reserve. We don't hand the money back in year, and we don't collect the money from you if we're under budget. That's why we have a stabilization reserve. $12 million is where I'd like it to be. We have several other reserves. Another topical one is Renew Thunder Bay. This is used for legacy capital projects that are leveraged by government, and money is being used there for multi-use indoor turf, okay, with the hope that it's going to be leveraged by government. And several other reserves, the infrastructure capital reserve, vehicle and equipment reserves, and these are used to round out spending. For example, A fire truck today costs just south of $1 million. What we don't want to do is just grab $1 million in 1 year to pay for a fire truck, so we use a reserve fund, and that smooths out the spending, and we draw from the reserve fund. And it smooths it out, so there's less pain in 1 year. So I can count, but I can't remember how many reserve funds we have, but we have a lot, and they have a bunch of different purposes.
Okay, and if nobody else has any, I've got a whole pile here, so.
I really don't like Charla's questions, so if someone out there could ask, that'd be better. Maybe someone from my team.
So let's stay on the revenue track. So I do see that the city of Thunder Bay is investigating a municipal sales tax as an option to raise money.
Yeah.
You talked about a new deal for municipalities. There seem to be some other revenue opportunities that maybe the city of Thunder Bay hasn't capitalized on as much as they could, or hasn't focused on as much as they could. Things like private sponsorship or private partnerships. I know that we have a new sponsorship policy that came in just recently that sort of defined how that would work. Is that something that administration is looking at more closely for those opportunities? You know, we've seen even with things like an indoor turf facility in other communities, they've looked to a private partnership to help to support building and operating. So tell me about your thoughts on those opportunities for revenue or cost sharing.
Yeah, so there's a lot there, and I'm going to try, but if I don't cover something that you want, let me know, okay? So first of all, the municipality is constrained in how we draw revenue. We are just simply not allowed to do a HST. We're just not allowed to do that. And what was you mentioned?
Municipal sales tax.
That's right, okay, municipal sales tax. Administration investigating that? Not really. We're not putting that on the table right now because we know we're not allowed to. Council simply cannot consider that. However, administration is supporting groups like the Association of Municipalities of Ontario in their advocacy to convince government, meaning Ontario, to change or increase the tools that municipalities can use. That is one example. AMO tried that in, I think it was 2018, and no party leader in Ontario at the time would support that. 1% for infrastructure added to the HST is what I'm talking about. Didn't happen, because nobody in government or provincial politics was interested in increasing taxes. But we are looking at different ways to collect revenue. Now, one of those is user fees. And there is a discussion, public discussion about user fees when it comes to hockey rinks, right? With the discussion we just had in the previous months about potentially closing one hockey rink. Problem with user fees, there's two problems. Number one is a sweet spot. Think baseball. If you know baseball, in order to hit the ball, you've got a bat that's round and a ball that's round, and it has to hit perfectly when the batter swings, and then you get a nice line drive or a home run. The sweet spot, the perfect spot. Otherwise, it's a foul ball or a strike and it doesn't work. I view user fees the same way. What is the sweet spot for user fees? The easy thing for us to do is crank them up and double them by 100%, and Bob's your uncle, carry on. Well, if we did that at the Canada Games complex, how many fewer people would actually go, and what would that do to our revenue? So we try to find the sweet spot there. And who knows what that is. The second argument about user fees is equity. One of the roles of a municipality is to be a leveler, to allow for equitable access to programs and services. Kids in poverty, food insecurity, home insecurity have less access to the Canada Games complex, full stop. And we have programs to help them, and user fees are one of them, to make it affordable. So the Canada Games complex and the hockey rinks are subsidized by the taxpayer writ large. That's because we provide a service, and the user fees don't provide all the revenue to operate them, and we allow for access, equitable access for everyone. So there's a whole bunch there. Did I cover it all? I might have forgotten something.
Sponsorship, private
Yes.
partnership.
Yes, so we are, sponsorship and partnership, we are working on that. You mentioned a policy. GM Kelly Robertson and the treasurer are working on different opportunities for that. And a decision made by council, you didn't mention this, but I'll mention it, multi-use indoor turf previously to go in, as a city operated rather than a public-private partnership. I think you might have been referring to that as an example. That was a decision of council. And there are many reasons behind that decision, but that's a whole other discussion. But in my mind, they decided that, we carry on. But we, administration, are open to public-private partnerships downstream. Those decisions are made by City Council.
That's a perfect segue to my next question. So, a lot of folks in this room actually work with boards or are administrators to boards. And they're familiar with the direct and protect role of a board in an organizational governance context. And typically under this framework, boards set policy direction and administration is bound to implement. Sometimes it appears that City Council is asked to make decisions that seem to be administrative in nature. An example, which we've talked about, Council is setting a policy on the operation of outdoor skating rinks. They say, here's the minimum, this is how it works, we're only gonna run them if they do this, that, and the other. And yet when some rink doesn't meet the threshold, it still comes back to council, making it very political instead of policy around, this neighborhood rink is getting closed, or potentially getting closed, which makes it very hard from a political perspective for councillors to vote for that. If there's already a policy in place, why does it have to come back to council to reaffirm the policy being implemented? And is there a way to adjust that process within our city administration to provide a little more smoothness there, rather than every single time you try to implement that kind of a policy closure, you have to make it into a political discussion versus a policy discussion?
These are really good questions that I had nothing to do with. Actually, last time Charla and I went out for a walk, I said, don't tell me the questions, I'm just gonna come in cold, and she stuck with that. I'll admit that now. So, administration has two types of authority. The first type of authority is statutory or legislative authority. The people in the administration are legislated in certain ways that they must do certain things or do certain things a certain way, and council has no say in this. Great examples are health and safety. We have duties to protect the worker, every worker in the city, regardless of what council says. Statutory officers have lawful responsibilities. I have a lawful responsibility. For example, I have to tell the truth, and I have to be straight, right? I have to be honest and genuine. Second type of authority, which most of our authority comes from, is delegated authority. That authority is delegated by council. Those delegations have built up over decades to where we have this sort of accident of history where we have now. We're operating with delegated authorities that root in 1981. And we change them when we can, and we update and modernize and all that kind of stuff. I have a bylaw, the city manager's bylaw, that grants me my specific delegated authority as a city manager, which is granted by city council to me, that was written 2003, something like that. And we have it on the books to be brought back, but strong mayors will implicate this. So we have this delegated authority. So why do we do what we do? It's based on decades of history of who decides what. And the hockey rink question, when we examine it, that is a decision of council based on the policies and the delegated authorities that we have today. The good news is, I have had discussions with several members of council about delegated authorities. And people like Councillor Oliver and I have discussed, why is this coming to us? And I say, why? And she says, can we change that? And I say, yes, absolutely we can, because I don't want to bring it either. I think it's better for administration to make certain decisions, taking politics and public pressure out of certain problems that we face. Not all, some. Council sets the policy, the ideal state, council sets the policy in advance, and we go and implement. So we want to get there. We're already there, but we want to get better. More current, more relevant to today's framework.
Good.
Is there anyone else with a question before? Okay, Dominic. Councillor Pasqualino.
Okay, so the meeting here today is to talk to Norm and hear about the things, but basically, we're here at the Chamber of Commerce. And I just, like to thank Norm for being here and also for you putting this event on. But really what we're here to talk about, more than anything else, is about business and how to get business to work. And we need business, because we don't have business, none of us have a job, or none of us have the things that we need to live our lives. One of my very happy things to hear was to go to Avalon just a few days ago, and they talked about the exciting things that are planned for Thunder Bay. We're looking at 500 new jobs for Thunder Bay, and it sounds fantastic. That is actually what we need for this community, but we need that many times over. This is the things that we're suffering with right now, and I know this probably more than anybody in this room, is that the plant that I'm now retired from has lost 1,000 jobs since 2019. So we need 2 of those Avalon plants that may come up in 5 or 10 years. And this is the whole point of why we're here, is to try and to make that thing happen. But what we also need to do is not only focus on the growth, but also on sustaining what we have. And it seemed to me that I was this guy saying, hey, we need to do this. And I was lobbying the federal government and the provincial government and going to Toronto and making deputations saying, I'm gonna lose these workers unless we can get our act together. And it's really frustrating when you're dealing with governments, because they had the power to do this, and yet they didn't. And now we're asking private businesses to do things that government itself wouldn't have done. I see in the back there, one of those posters is Inner City Industrial Supply, and I'm gonna tell you, they are a big supplier for the plant. They really are, and I love that place. I buy a lot of stuff for me, out of Inner City Industrial Supply, because they got grinding things and tools and things that, quite frankly, if the plant and businesses like it don't survive, I'm not gonna get my places to buy my stuff that I can't get at Canadian Tire for a reasonable price. So that's my biggest frustration, I can say, from City Hall, is that we talk about these goals and these good news stories, but sometimes, there's 1,000 people that are gone at the plant, and we don't even think about those things. So what we need to do is also to keep the businesses here and make sure that they're sustainable and profiting, and making sure that they can be here with the additional part. But right now, the way we are, at least from what I can see it at this point, we're maybe adding to our reserves, but there's a big hole in the water that's running out. So that's, I don't know if you have any other comments.
You have a question for Norm, or you got a question for me? 'Cause I got an answer.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's rhetorical too.
My question
How do
is
you-
how we can do this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so, Councillor Pascalino, I think, is quite right. In fact, he and I had discussions before he was elected as a councillor in dealing with work at the time Bombardier. Councillor Oliver chairs the Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, who did exhaustive, and I'm gonna mention Jamie Taylor over there too, CEO of the CEDC. The IGA, the Intergovernmental Affairs Committee, the CEDC are busting their backsides to protect what we had. When I became city manager in 2015, Bombardier was probably the paramount file. And in 2015, 1,000 people were there?
Yeah.
Okay, now?
More. 200.
200, right? We, Councillor Oliver, the CEDC, City Council were not blind to this. They worked very hard to try to protect that, and it's absolutely true, and I agree with your comments 100%, Councillor Pascalino.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. And I'm so glad to hear a councillor who recognized that it is important to also build an environment where business can continue to grow and thrive. And that is why a 5.5% tax increase is not gonna go over very well with the business community. And that is why we need, as much as we can, support from the city and city council to reduce as much red tape as possible, to increase the process smoothness so that these businesses can actually stay here and come here. And that is why we're having these conversations, to talk about what are those challenges and how can the business community and the city, administration and council work together towards that goal that we're all looking forward, which is a stronger business community, a stronger community, and a growing community, because that's what we all want. We want to be able to stay here. We want our kids to be able to stay here, our grandkids to be able to stay here, and to know they'll have a place to live, and a good job, and a safe community, and a great school, or great friends, or all the things that bring us quality of life. So I appreciate the comments there, because that's exactly where, you know, we're all on the same page, I think, Councillor, so thank you for that. And I use that as a wrap-up, because I know we've all got meetings probably to go to this afternoon, and I want to say thank you, Norm. Really appreciate our ongoing relationship and your conversation and frankness with our business community here today. And I hope you know that you know my number. Just call me anytime if there's anything that we can support you on. And certainly I know that the conversation will continue. The road is a little bumpy right now for so many, including business and the city. But we'll get through it together and work to build a stronger community. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm just going to remind everybody of a couple of events before we wrap up. Tomorrow night, our after business at the Valhalla Hotel and Conference Center from 5 till 7. Drop in and network with some business colleagues. And then our next leaders lunch will be with Chief of Police Darcy Fleury on October the 24th at the Slovak Legion, and we hope to see you there. So thank you again to everyone for coming. Thanks to our sponsor, T-Bay Talent and Intercity Industrial. Thank you, Norm, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Yeah.